and welcome to another episode of Pep Talk, the persuasive evangelism podcast from Solas. I am Andy Bannister, and I am joined by my esteemed colleague, Simon Wenham, all the way from Oxford. Simon, how are you doing today?
Thank you very much. It's very kind of you to call me esteemed, but I'm not quite sure if that's warranted, but it's very kind of you.
Well, today this podcast is going to be one of the hottest places to be, I think, literally, because as we record this, the UK is in the middle of a heat wave. Are you melting there in Oxford, Simon?
Yeah, definitely. Yes, we've got a portable air conditioning unit on. We've been huddling around it. It's roasting.
Well, one of the funny things is that loads of things in the UK are shutting down because it's hot. Our local scout troop are not meeting tonight. All the schools are shutting. And for me, the most amazing thing today was an African friend messaged me this morning on Facebook and said it all in 4 emojis. He sent me simply a message that had a picture of the UK flag, then a sun symbol, then a snowflake, and then a laugh out loud symbol. Which I think just summed up, because I think the Africans there are going, yeah, we have sun too, and we're still all working fine. But anyway, aside from hot introductions, let's move from that hot introduction to another hot introduction, because we have not one, but 2 guests on the show today, because one guest is not enough. So we are joined today, very excited for this one. We are joined by Adam Curtis and Ian Miller, who are down there in Maidenhead. Adam, Ian, welcome to the podcast.
Hello, Andy and Simon. It's good to be here.
Yeah, glad to be with you.
Well, it's great to have you. And I love the bio, by the way. Whenever we do these podcasts, people may think this is just all like seat of the pants stuff. But no, we do work. We do effort. There is a bio that guests send in. So you guys have told me that Adam Curtis is taller than the average door frame and is a minister in Maidenhead. And Ian, you're the other Associate Vicar at St. Mary's and used to be a barrister before becoming a vicar. So I'm glad the Lord saved you from such dark and terrible places. But you're united around this initiative called Maidenhead Questions. That's the thing that's connected you. So why doesn't one of you...
I'd also say we're united around the Lord as well.
Oh, I love what you did there. Adam. Yes, absolutely. So fantastic. So guests 1, presenters 0. I remember that. Don't worry, that will come back and bite you. So tell us about Maidenhead Questions. Let's kick off with what is the Maidenhead Question kind of initiative, because it's an amazing thing, and rather than me mangle it, I'm going to let one of you talk us into what it is, and then we'll dig into what's happened and the story and the way God's worked through it, and what other lessons there might be for other churches here from what you folks have done. So take us away. Maidenhead Questions, what is it?
Well, it all began when the Bible Society released their Quiet Revival report, talking about how young people were engaging with Christianity, and particularly how much they were engaging with it online. Now, I know there's lots of complexities around that report, but Maidenhead Questions was born and are reflecting upon it. And also just hearing the stories of people in our own churches, the fact that actually lots of people were coming into church claiming already to be Christians, and yet this was the very first church they'd ever been to. And it was a sense that actually they've engaged so much with Christianity, with Jesus Christ online. And so we were then reflecting, if loads of young people are interested in Christianity, people are turning online before they walk through the door, how can we build a bridge to people here in Maidenhead? How can we share the gospel with people who we're never going to meet and who are, and we don't have a contact with? And so we came up with this idea. Why don't we ask the people of Maidenhead what their questions for God are? And then based on those questions, we're going to produce podcast answers. And that was how Maidenhead Questions was born.
Fantastic. And so how did you go about doing that practically? Obviously, it's one thing to say, let's ask questions. It's another to actually work out how you find out what people are asking. So how did you do that?
We went about it in a number of different ways. We thought that what we really needed to do is obviously get people to put their questions somewhere. So we set up a website which they could put their questions into. And then we had a great church initiative of getting out into the town with flyers, which had the address of the website, and inviting people to put their questions on the website. And we also actually took a billboard outside the station, which was a sort of, one of those huge, great big billboards, which was quite fun, but it's quite nice to be flyering near that. And so the idea was that people would be willing to put their questions down, and we had the strapline on the flyers, on the poster, which was "God, my question is," and there was a slightly sort of humorous side to the way the graphics had been done. We didn't want people to feel like they were kind of they were going to be putting their question in to be sort of lectured at or anything like that. We wanted to sort of draw people in and invite them to do that sort of freely. So that's how we went about it.
And we also got T-shirts made as well, and then different members of the church could buy them. And it was just so fun watching people wearing the T-shirts as they were running around doing park runs, or wearing the T-shirts when they were picking up their kids at school, as they were going out flyering. And then we produced loads of social media content, so little shorts of people's testimonies and the questions they'd engaged with, and did some paid ads on social media as well.
Well, of course, what the ladies and gentlemen at home cannot see is that you two are wearing, you're modelling for us these beautiful kind of T-shirts. We'll have to put a photo up kind of somewhere on the Solus website, perhaps accompanying this episode, so people can see those T-shirts in all their glory. Before we come to some of the things you discovered and some of the kind of questions that came in, one question I wanted to ask actually: did you find it interesting having the conversations out when you were flyering? Because presumably some people actually got drawn in and were asking questions and chatting with you because you've given out a flyer with that on. So was that itself an opener to some interesting conversations when you were out on the street in front of the station, wherever it was, doing this kind of stuff?
I would say that the answer to that is mixed. We had some occasions when we were out there on the high street, and people were really stopping and engaging. And it's really interesting as well. One Saturday, for example, a member of the church family baked about 200 brownies, absolutely delicious brownies, and we had a stall at the end of the drive. We're Town Centre Church, so we're right on the high street. And people were stopping and helping themselves, and then really happy to chat and take a flyer. And we had lots of good conversations, and times like that. I think when we were just outside the station during rush hour, people were focused on getting their train or coming home, and less willing to stop. And at times, those, if I'm honest, those times could be quite hard. There were some people who really, once they knew what you were about, there was sort of an air of hostility almost. And I actually found once or twice I found that quite hard, but I was kind of reassured that we were in a place where it was good to be. we were right out there amongst people who were hostile as well as those who were curious. Adam, would you add anything to that?
I would say that my best conversations came when I was wearing the T-shirt and doing just normal life things, like going to a cafe, going to a doctor's, whatever it was. And in those sort of spaces, and then engaging with someone, and then they'd be like, "Oh, what's this T-shirt about? What's got my question is?" And then you could talk about it. And I, especially some people who I'd see multiple times, and they'd be like, "Oh, you started that initiative. Like, what sort of questions are people asking?" So then I'd tell them, "Oh, well, the number one question so far is about suffering." And they'd be like, "Oh, and what would you say to that?" And I'd be like, "Ah." But then we'd be off. Then we'd be having a good conversation. So for me, it was less to do with the intentional flyering and more to do with the unintentional conversations.
So that's interesting. Does that mean you were wearing the T-shirt literally? I mean, was it over a long period of time? Was that the deal of what you were doing in terms of the church reaching out? Not necessarily the same T-shirt. You may have had more than one.
Yeah, it was a 2-week window where we encouraged people to be wearing them. So yeah,
great. And so, can you give us a sense of the types of questions that people had? Was it simply everyone just has their own questions, or were there certain themes that came out? Because obviously you live in a certain area, and we know that, for example, a local area might have a certain type of local politics, for example, and people are shaped in different ways. So I'd love to, if you could just give a sense of what sorts of questions people were asking in your area.
Well, our most popular sort of type of questions, maybe unsurprisingly, were questions around suffering. And there were some people asking them quite academically, and then some people were asking them, and you could sense there was a lot of feeling behind the question, and sometimes a huge amount of detail as well was coming through. Our second most popular type of question actually completely threw me, and I wasn't ready for this at all. And this was on questions around the Trinity and the nature of Jesus' divinity. And I sort of should have seen that this was going to happen, because actually our church is 100 meters away from a mosque, and we had a big, huge poster on the side of the church. So actually, of course, we were going to draw those sort of questions. But I did find it quite interesting, because there were clearly from Muslim perspective, also a few from Jewish perspectives as well. And then there were also a few which weren't so obviously linked to a religious sort of like bent or angle, and yet still on the nature and character of who Jesus was and his divinity. So that did take me by surprise. Then our third most popular topic was
Heaven, hell, and the afterlife.
Thank you, Ian. Heaven, hell, and the afterlife, questions around death. And what's been really interesting, the episode we made on that has really engaged people. Then we had questions on does God exist, and questions of doubt and faith. And then lastly, our fifth most popular topic was on the topic of other religions, which Andy was our guest on. And then I'd also then throw in there were loads of other questions which didn't fit into any of those categories. So we did have some questions on sexuality and gender and transgender in the church. But we also had a few questions which had the most vigor in all the questions we got asked. The ones with the most vigor were on hypocrisy within the church and abuse within the church.
And bigotry.
Yeah, bigotry. And so we did an extra episode specifically on that because we felt those are the questions with the most feeling, other than the suffering ones behind them.
I mean, that fascinates me. And by the way, I want to say on air as well, I've said it off air, I'm very grateful because you guys shared with myself the question set, and I and Michael Lotz, who's a friend of Solas, who's an evangelist like me, we're writing a book on questions this summer. And you guys kindly shared your questions with us. And what's interesting, your bunch of questions mapped onto, we've got about 1,200 kind of now. And I would say very similar themes, actually. Lots around suffering is a big one, and then some really weird outlying ones and all kinds of pieces. So here's the thing I want to ask you next, though. We've talked about questions and how you collect them. You're out on the street flyering. You had the website set up to gather them. Brilliant. Obviously, you didn't just collect questions. You've implied, because you said episode there, you've done something with those questions in terms of giving answers. So what was the next step in the project for you? How did you go about answering those? How have you been doing that, and how has that gone? You gave us a couple of little hints there in that last answer there, Adam. But what was kind of the next step in the project once you'd done the question collection?
Well, shall I say first of all the timetable? I mean, I'm not saying that we might have reflect on the timetable we had and whether it was the right one. But what we did was 2 weeks. I think Adam's already said 2 weeks of collecting questions. We then had 2 weeks where we put together podcasts answering the top 5 questions. And then we had another 2 weeks where we were going out there really trying to encourage people to engage with those podcasts. But yeah, so the answers, we've invited a number of esteemed guests to answer the questions, and you being one of them.
And some dodgy ones too. So
and
that's
Andy,
fair enough,
and we had a really good time recording those podcasts with some excellent people. We had Glenn Scrivener from Speak Life. We had Naomi Brem, and others from Ocker, and you, Andy, and so we've got the sort of resource now, which we hope will help the church family as they listen and then share with others. Obviously, we're hoping that people outside the church will listen in, and that's why we're going out. We had another big billboard in that third 2 week period where we advertised the podcast, and we were flyering, trying to encourage people to listen to the answers.
Really hope you are enjoying today's podcast. But did you know that as well as the Pep Talk podcast, Solas also does live events in person in churches all around the country, equipping and encouraging Christians to get a little bit better at sharing their faith. And we've worked from the south of England to the Highlands and the islands of Scotland and all kinds of places in between. If you'd like us to come to your church and do a Confident Christianity event, get in touch with us through the website. And now, back to the programme.
So you do all of that. To what degree do you know that the people asking the questions have got them answered? I mean, is there any way of connecting in, or have you had any feedback from people from what you've done saying, actually, that was really helpful, or it's brought them closer to the Lord, or moved them significantly in their walk towards Christ?
Oh, great question. And I think we're still in that stage of pushing the podcast out. So, the last episode literally dropped on Friday. Jason Roach dealing with questions on hypocrisy in the church. Fantastic episode. And so we're still very much in that pushing it out. Within every episode, we were inviting people to come along to visit us on a Sunday. So we can see that people are listening to episodes. We can see that people are engaging with episodes. We hear from church members and telling us, I loved I loved that episode about heaven and hell and death. And so I've sent it on to a friend. Like, we know that sort of stuff's happening. But at this moment in time, we're very much on the pushing it out. And then our prayer is that actually this will just be a bridge builder into people's lives. Maybe answers a difficult question, maybe help them start to grapple with Jesus Christ for themselves for the first time. And then in time, we will start to see people coming through the door who we've never met. But we're very much in the stage right now of still pushing it out. And praying that the Lord will produce a harvest if that's His will.
Now, I suppose the next question I have is a slightly more difficult one. But then you two are used to difficult questions by now. You've collected hundreds of them.
We're used to asking the difficult questions, Andy.
Yes, no comment. So obviously, I mean, I genuinely am really impressed by what you two have done. I don't just say that. I travel around the country, see lots of different churches, see different initiatives. I love coming across creativity in evangelism. I think it's a very creative idea. So I suppose the question I have is, obviously, you guys are a slight, not big, but medium-sized kind of church. You've put this on. People listening to this who think this is a great idea, what would you say to them to encourage them? Do you need to be a medium-sized church? Is this adaptable in different ways? I mean, I know you're still in the process, but to people who are intrigued and thinking, hey, we might want to think about trying this out in our community, is there any advice, any tips, things not to do that you learned early on that we haven't talked about, or things that you reflect already and go, that was a key moment for us? So yeah, is there any sort of transferable kind of skills, transferable learning here? Because I'd love to think there might be others listening to Pep Talk who might come and give this a go, suitably adapted for their context.
Yeah, that's a great question. It has to be acknowledged. We're very, very blessed as a church to have a staff team to put this on, but also to have members of the church who can really help us. Like, there's a man in the church who edits podcasts, so he's editing that. There's a guy in the church who does social media, so he's helped us with that. There's a lady in the church who builds websites, so she's done that for us. So
amazing.
We are very blessed, and we want to be acknowledge that this isn't possible for every church.
Just by the way, sorry to cut you off there, but I think I just want to flag that up, Adam. That is a really important point, because I think some churches are more blessed than they realize, because you may have people with skills, you may have young people who have those skills, and often on some of the sort of forms of ministry we do, we don't use those skills. So straight away, I love the fact that you identify people who might otherwise be sitting there thinking, well, God's made me a podcast editor. What can I do for the Lord? And the project you came up with answered that. So just to flag up, I think that's a more important step, actually, than listeners may have picked up. Look at who God's put within your community.
Can I just add to that as well? It has been a real joy working with members of the church family, but actually, there's those people who are doing those particular, very specific things, but then just the general thing of a whole load of people coming together, whether it's flyering, whether it's baking brownies, whether it's going out, and there's a sort of like a wonderful. It's a lovely thing for the church family. It's a good thing for a church family to be pulling together and doing a project like this. But I think Adam and I have talked about this and reflected on the fact that we actually did have quite we had a good budget for it, and actually not. I mean, most people will not be getting billboards outside the station. That was a first for us. Yeah. It was a foray into a completely unknown field for me, booking that sort of thing with advertising agencies, but. And I think most people won't be able to do that. But I think when we started the project, it was only later that Adam and I discovered that our church had done something similar about 10 years before. But they'd done it on a shoestring and done it in a very different way. And it just made me think that actually it is possible to do something like this without having the billboards and things like that. That actually just getting out there and asking those questions and collating them some way, you could do it a lot more cheaply than we did.
Yeah, that's very, very true. And like, you could literally send people out onto the street with clipboards asking people what their questions are. You don't need to necessarily build a website. And actually asking people, engaging with people, would be a wonderful way of seeing what people think. And the very fact that we produce loads of podcast episodes. I do think there's something about this being online, which is particularly helpful for our moment and our time. But actually, you still could have done it differently. You could have asked one speaker to come and to deal with a number of topics, rather than asking, well, I think we had 7 speakers in the end, dealing with different questions and topics. So there are ways of minimizing the work which is involved.
Yeah. But by the way, on that as well, I know then Simon's got another question that he's dying to ask. I recognise the facial expression. But the other thing as well, I think, Adam, to encourage people listening to this, the other thing I like that you did is that you drew in people, who had the expertise in asking questions. Because I think some churches might say, well, we don't have someone who can do that. But you just shown, you brought me in, you brought Glenn, Naomi, others. There are lots of people out there doing this kind of ministry who are more than happy to be a resource to churches. So to encourage other church leaders, I can guarantee that if you're a church leader in the country, think you're doing something even remotely similar, if you reach out to Solas, Speak Life, Ocker, we are most likely to say, yeah, we'd love to, if all it requires is jumping onto a recording for half an hour. I think that's all it took, half an hour, 40 minutes with you gents, and we've helped produce something. So again, I'm a big believer that God has equipped the church perhaps in more ways than we realise, and we can sometimes stop and think we can't do it, but actually maybe that we do have the pieces. So again, the way that you brought so many people together, from the brownie baker to the question answer is brilliant. Simon, you were going to ask something, though, I think.
That's very kind. I was just wondering, what are you hoping to achieve, sort of, bar the obvious? So let's say in a year's time, you've done this. Where are you wanting the community to be? Is it about just getting a sort of greater openness? Is it points of contact with others? I'd just love to have a sense of what you are really hoping for your community in terms of how this will change things. And I appreciate it's early doors at the moment.
Oh, Simon, that's a good question. I don't know if I have a wonderfully well thought through answer. I know one part of my answer would be the joy about making an online resource is that it lives on. Like, the wonder of doing an event is you actually get to meet people in person, and that is just great. You get to build the rapport, but then the event is done. The great thing about doing an online resource is that we're going to move the podcasts from the Maidenhead Questions website onto our own church website, and then actually I think they've still got a shelf life for the next 5 years. And actually, I host my own podcast called the Delight Podcast, and actually just watching how those numbers grow over the years is just so encouraging to me. So actually that sense that we're still going to have this great Maidenhead specific evangelistic resource available on our website for years to come, which we can continue to push out for our social media and continue to encourage people who are coming onto Christianity Explored and whatnot to engage with. That encourages me that we've got this great resource now.
Add to that, I listened to Randy Newman. Is it Randy Newman who wrote that book on questioning evangelism? Right. Listen to him speak on a number of occasions, and he speaks of people being on a kind of alphabet spectrum from atheist to Z to a committed Christian, the most sort of committed Christian, and he often speaks about our task as evangelists as moving people along that alphabet. We might move them from A to B. We might move them from M to R, and I guess one of my hopes for this will be that this will have affected people in different ways. The fact that we have been inviting people to ask questions and really let them ask their most kind of visceral questions and passionate questions, and my goodness, we've really got some of those represented here. I hope that for some of those people, they might not come near a church for a long time, but actually just asking that question and engaging with this will be a first step, and might I hope have moved them somewhere along the alphabet. But for others, it might be the thing which actually means that they take that step of coming, perhaps not to our church, but someone else's. And then, of course, there's the effect on the church family, which I always think whenever we do evangelism, we grow as a church family. And I always think that actually sometimes you can put on an evangelistic event, you can have a great evangelistic project, and you can look and think, well, I wanted to see lots of numbers, lots of people putting their trust in the Lord. And it doesn't look like we've seen that, but actually we've seen a huge effect on the church family who have grown as they've gone through this initiative. So I kind of, whenever I look at an evangelistic project, that's the kind of way I'm thinking, and I think it's the same with this.
Yeah, it's funny you say that as just a final comment. I think the other thought I had there, Ian, as well, is the other really beautiful thing this project has done is I would hope in time it will encourage Christians in their evangelism, because one of the fears I often hear from people that holds them back from sharing their faith is, what happens if someone asks me a question? Well, praise the Lord, in Maidenhead, you've partly answered that, because now any Christian in the community should hopefully be a little bit more confident, knowing if a question comes up to go, that's a great question. And, I think on the Maidenhead Questions website, probably, lots of other people like you asked that. Should we take a look? And it's localized, it's got an answer to it, and it's wrapped in a story. And I think if you can take that fear away from a Christian that I'm going to get, sort of kiboshed with a question that no one's thought about, it's going to help. So final question I have for you, and then Simon will do a wrap, is, so we've talked about Maidenhead Questions and all you're doing. Where do people go? Is there a place that people can go to find what's going on, to find the podcast? You talked about moving it onto the church website in time, but where's the best place for people to come and find all the stuff that's come out of this amazing project?
Maidenheadsquestions.co.uk.
That's an original URL. I see what you did there. Well, we'll put a link to that in the show notes, won't we, Simon?
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Adam and Ian. It's been wonderful to hear that. The thing that's really struck me is that everyday evangelism is about those points of contact, isn't it? And in yesteryear, we used to sort of knock on people's doors, and we don't obviously do that in the same way. But actually, the online world, as you said, you connect with many, many more people, and it shows that people have got questions. So I love that. The church needs to be answering them, and these could be personal questions, but they could also be themes. And actually, we won't be discovering them unless we're doing getting out there and asking our own questions of other people to find out what they're asking. And the one thing that came to mind whilst you were speaking is when Andy was speaking at a Confident Christianity event, someone asked a question about manifesting. And it was really interesting because I had heard the language, but I had never really sort of thought of it as a thing. And the person was saying, a friend of mine is all about manifesting what they want to have, happen in their life. And it was really interesting because had that question not come up, I would had no idea that was a question that someone had or that people were thinking about. And it really struck me as to sort of being more in tune with people around us. But I just want to say again, thank you so much, Adam and Ian. Hopefully this episode will inspire more people. And as Adam and Ian have said, actually, you don't have to be a huge church. There are other ways of reaching out to the community around you. And it's wonderful, isn't it, to see what God might then do with those questions that people have, and as we deal and answer them, and also building up the church too, which is wonderful as well. So thank you all for listening. Thank you also, Andy, for being with us, and do tune in again for a more inspiring guest on Pep Talk, the Persuasive Evangelism podcast from SOLAS.